I met the pathologist who explained to me, and I want to call it the art of malignancy grading of prostate cancer. I was appalled to find out that when he told me that 30 or 40% of pathologists disagree on the malignancy grade. And as he described the problem to me, it seemed made to order for image analysis. I really thought this was a problem one could tackle with image analysis, computer science, computer graphics. You have to realize the time of this. Now you run this wonderful pathology podcast, and you know very well that at that time, I moved to Sweden in 2008. People didn't talk about artificial intelligence and deep learning. Now it's a household word. It was impossible.
Learn about the newest digital pathology trends in science and industry. Meet the most interesting people in the niche and gain insights relevant to your own projects. Here is where pathology meets computer science. You are listening to the Digital Pathology Podcast with your host, Dr. Alexandra Zhurov.
Welcome, my digital pathology trailblazers. Today, my guest is Ingrid Carlbom. She is a professor emeritus at Uppsala University and the founder of CADES AI. Welcome, Ingrid, to the show. How are you today?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very well. I hope you are too. I am the founder of CADES.ai. And CADES stands for Cancer Decision Support Systems. And our first focus was prostate cancer. Mm-hmm. So I was born in Sweden and got my undergraduate education in applied mathematics at Stockholm University. And then I moved to the United States to study computer science and got a PhD at Brown University in computer science. Then I had what some would call it rather eclectic career. I first worked in the oil industry at Schlumberger, but I headed a group, and then I moved on to the computer end industry and worked at Digital Equipment Corporation at one of the research labs in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And then I went on to telecom and Bell Laboratories. So some 30 years ago, I met the pathologist who explained to me, and I want to call it the art of malignancy grading of prostate cancer. I was appalled to find out that when he told me that 30 or 40% of pathologists disagree on the malignancy grade. And as he described the problem to me, it seemed made to order for image analysis. But it would be about 13 years until I could work on this problem. So I then moved back to Sweden, to Uppsala University, with the idea to work with pathologists at the university hospital on this problem.
I love the fact that you had this eclectic career, like you named it, because often in that situation, new perspectives are being brought into pathology, into medicine. And I'm super curious how you looked at this problem of pathologists disagreeing 30 or 40% of the time on the grading.
Well, as I said, I really thought this was a problem one could tackle with image analysis, computer science, computer graphics, which is what I knew. You have to realize the time of this. Now you run this wonderful pathology podcast, and you know very well that at that time, I moved to Sweden in 2008. People didn't talk about artificial intelligence and deep learning. Now it's a household word. So I was told by pathologists, and several, not only both in this country and in Sweden, this couldn't be done. It was impossible. I think also maybe they were worried that eventually they would be replaced, but that wasn't the intention.
I think they are still a little bit worried. Every time a new AI comes out, the same questions come up. But I think it's just a new technology question. But 2008, that wasn't the case.
Well, then it was very new, or it hardly existed. So I think I can boast and say CADES was a pioneer in the area of applying artificial intelligence to this problem of malignancy grading of prostate cancer. Now, we took a different tack than the competition, who seemed to be satisfied to work with H&E images. We had difficulties with that data and decided to develop a new stain. And then we built algorithms and a system on top of that. And we did all of that for only $1.6 million.
That is little
compared to our competition.
Yes.
Not very much. Did I answer your question of?
Yes, because and I know we're going to dive deeper because that's the point of like the innovation here, the different stain, H&E being the classical stain that everybody relies on. But in your case, you very quickly decided that this does not provide great contrast between different structures, be it epithelium and stroma or different cells, right? It's low contrast. And that was the contribution to inter and intra-site variations and the variability that we have in the grading. So can you quantify these problems? Like how bad is it actually for this particular prostate problem compared to the alternative stain that you guys used?
Yes, we can. And this is the time you should use the first picture I have. So we can quantify this in this subtractive color space. So where you have the magenta color in the lower left, the cyan in the lower right, and yellow on top. And these triangles are subtractive color triangles, are a little truncated, but I think you can see how the color varies. Mm-hmm. Now, these are produced by mapping the subtractive colors that come out of the microscope when you put a white light through the tissue, and that is a subtractive process. And what happens is that the color then clusters in different places for each of the stain tissue combination. So these two triangles are from two adjoining tissue sections. They're cut 4 microns apart. So for all intents and purposes, they are identical. Mm-hmm. And you see with H&E, that the color, and this is the color now from the epithelium and stroma overlap, but on the right, which is the stain mm-hmm. eventually developed, you see that the stain...
They are not together anymore.
They're not, yes, they have two separate clusters. They mm-hmm. have a distance between them, and they are tight. This means that you can actually use the color for the segmentation to identify what is stroma and what is epithelium.
Mm-hmm. So we have the H&E, and the other stain that you guys are using is Picra Series Red with hematoxylin counterstain, right?
Yes, and we'll get to how that we arrive mm-hmm. at that. But the point is here that there are numerous measures in image processing, computer vision, that will measure the clustering performance and the cluster separation. And so we can really quantify how good or how well these stains perform for segmentations.
And in the case of the Picra Series Red, you can quantify that.
Yes, because mm-hmm. they are separate. We can quantify it for anything, but as you can see, the clustering performance for the Picra Series Red with hematoxylin gives two separate clusters, which means that we can find, and you will see examples of that, where the stain is very different. We can use the color for the segmentation or to pull out the epithelium. And remember, mm-hmm. the epithelium is where the cancer starts. It seems quite relevant.
Mm-hmm. So question, did you know what kind of stain you guys were looking for? So let's say you looked at the H&E, and does one who knows about color know that there is going to be just one cluster and you have to find something that is going to be separate? Or is it an experiment where you go and test the different staining options that there are?
No, we tested in the end 150 different protocols to find the optimum one. And, and that was rather methodical. I mean, what we did was we first looked at different stains and counter stains that, all of the ones we could think of, and then selected the best such combination. But when I said best, it wasn't only the best clustering performance. We thought it important that it was something that pathologists could easily adapt to, and also that it wouldn't be more costly than H&E, because we knew that then would be impossible to introduce it. So that's what we then selected. But after that, we went to manufacturers. So we picked Picture Series Red and Hematoxin, and then we went to manufacturers who make this. But none of them would promise us that they could deliver consistent stains.
Really?
Really. Yes. I talked to all of them. And so we decided we should make our own. But of course, we didn't have manufacturing facilities, right? So we outsourced it to a company right outside Uppsala that does contract work for MedTech. And they made these stain kits for us to our specifications, and also has very strict procedures that they promised us for giving us consistent, from batch to batch. And I can talk more in detail about that.
How did you test the so-called non-inferiority to H&E, or how did you prove that it actually was better?
So we tested it on the patient flow in Uppsala on 75 patients prospectively. We asked ourselves 3 questions. The first was non-inferiority of CADES versus a pathologist is working separately on H&E. Now, that's not how we normally would use CADES, but we also didn't want CADES to give bad advice. So we wanted to see how it works standalone. So the second question is, how did CADES work with a pathologist versus a pathologist working on the microscope with H&E? And then we also were interested in risk analysis. So NCCN has guidelines or rules when you should use observation versus curative treatment. And we wanted to incorporate that. So the way this was done was, and very much the way these tests are normally done, the university normally cuts 3 sections at different depths for biopsy, and then they cut a 4th one for us and draw it to the last one. So we used the last H&E stain of the 3 and compared it to the one cut for us, which was then stained with the CADES stain. And of course, we used all the standard rules of ruling out bad data and have enough time for the part. We only used one pathologist for this, and we had enough for the pathologist to forget the first grading. So in summary, the first thing we were very pleased about was that CADES did not miss a single cancer, not a single cancer, and I think that's very important. But the downside of that is, of course, we've set that threshold, so we also get a number of mimickers. Okay. But I think it's better that the pathologist rules out the mimickers, and that we try to do that. Eventually, I think we could train CADES better, including these mimickers. So that was the first good. The second thing was, how did CADES perform standalone? And I think we can say with confidence it performs at least as a general pathologist based on data you see in the literature. And then the agreement between the pathologist using CADES and looking at the tissue in the microscope, there was an over 80% agreement, which is far better than in
between pathologists.
In the intra-variations.
Inter-observer variability, yes.
The pathologists, you notice, that it's always between grade 3 and 4, and pathologists would upgrade and downgrade between those, and that's sort of what you expect. The risk analysis of also agreement about 80%, which is also very good. So we were very pleased with this study. Now, of course, we only did this with one pathologist, and it should be done on a larger scale. with multiple institutions and so on. But as a first study, we felt very comfortable with our results.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's good confirmation to keep working on it. You tested these 150 different protocols. You found that Picroseries Red with hematoxylin is the one you want to go with. So from the computer vision and the AI/segmentation and the image processing standpoint, what were the advantages compared to H&E? Why is this better for computer vision, basically?
It is because now we can segment the glands, and that in turn leads to other advantages. If we start with the RGB image of a tissue section and then plot that in a 3D scatter plot, so each pixel in the tissue image, the color of each pixel becomes a point in this 3D scatter plot. And then you notice that each stained tissue combination forms an arc from the light source to where the light is fully attenuated. So it arcs around the achromatic axis. And so now we are simulating what's happening in the microscope, right? We are applying the Beer-Lambert transformation to linearize this. And for those who don't know what the Beer-Lambert transformation is. I'm sorry?
Including me.
Oh, I'm sure you know, but it models how, in this case, how the light is absorbed in tissue. And it's fairly easy formula. We don't have to go into details. Just
for me to understand, you did this, what we have here in the image, you plotted this in the 3D space, and you wanted a specific combination of these. And that's like in the third image, we have this triangle, right? This is what you wanted here.
That's the triangle we spoke about originally. So what then happens is that we do a perspective transformation or projection of this data onto the triangle. And that will form these clusters. Those clusters.
And
correct.
Okay. And you knew exactly what kind of, that you wanted the separate clustering, and then you went and did the experiments and checked which of the stains that you experimented with would provide the most separate clustering. Am I understanding this correctly?
Using a number of measures of the clustering, yes.
And you had a systematic approach to this, measured, and then picked the one stain that was separating the best.
Yeah. So this image, when we look at it, essentially simulates what's going on in the microscope in a very simple way. So the point is that once you have the clusters, you can find the individual clusters with something called the EM method, expectation maximization. And if you don't know what that is, it's a standard statistical technique. But once you've found them, the mean or the center of those clusters is where you can form the reference vectors from that. And that allows you to do a decomposition of the original image into two density maps, one for the stroma and one for the epithelia. And do notice, if this is different tissue, it could be for different tissue components, but we work solely on prostate cancer. So we're good so far. So now that we can do the decomposition, so we have the stroma on one hand and the epithelium on the other, we can use those two density maps to segment the glands. And we use some discrete mathematics to do so. We did not, draw the outlines, but we actually segmented the whole thing with mathematical morphology, it's called, which works in the digital domain rather than outline things with polygons or with continuous continuous curves.
So a question that comes to my mind is, okay, if it's happening in the mathematical domain, when you bring a pathologist in the loop, how can they confirm that this is the same morphology that they would be looking at.
But we're changing the staining. We didn't show the difference in the stains. We can do that. So here is picroceus red, and the hematoxylin. So hematoxylin is two, again, adjoining tissue sections, and this is a grade, or at least in grade 3 cancer. To the left is the hematoxylin, and to the right is the picroceus red with hematoxylin. And I said, what did I say? H&E to the left and picroceus red with hematoxylin to the right. And as you notice, the big difference is that now you can see the distinct blue in the epithelium. But I think if a pathologist look at that, we haven't changed the tissue edit. Here we see an example of a very high-grade cancer. I mean, I don't know, you might, under your pathologist, I don't know how much you know about prostate cancer, but this is grade 4 and 5 on the Gleason scale cancer, which is, as bad as it gets, I would say. And here we have now segmented the glands, and the yellow lines here is the segmentation. Now the red dots, so this is something where a pathologist, and I would always have a pathologist do this. I do not do segmentation, although I became a pretty good prostate pathologist by sitting next to the pathologist a lot, but I still don't trust myself 100%. So the pathologist would go in on the right-hand side, you see, and it's a little hard to see, but you can see there's a lot of labels. So you pick and say, I see a grade 5 cancer, so I'm going to pick that. And then you just put your cursor over those glands, and you go click, 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 and you get these red dots highlighted at you. And you can then, we didn't finish this. This is just to illustrate the process. But you, the pathologist, can here now say, this is grade 5, and you will notice there are some other grade 4 cancers, even grade 3 over to the left. And so the pathologist will be able to confirm that this works.
A follow-up question to this one. We see this image, and is this for training the system, or is this for already confirming the output of the system, the diagnosis?
So I think you should give this talk, because you are now going to the next slides.
Okay.
So this looks a bit messy, but so now we have a lot of glands. I think we segmented the glands, but we also have things like stroma and veins and so on. So we had about, I think, 29,000, over 29,000 such things. But, it's very fast. We can do 1,000 or more in an afternoon. So, how do we train our network? Well, we have all these glands, and the pathologists have labeled them in the process we just saw, right? So
that was this
here.
one.
So they have labeled it here. So now we have all these glands. So we put a little square patch around each epithelial nuclei. And then we know that nucleus came from a grade 3 gland, a grade 4 gland, and what type of grade 4 gland, because there are many different types. And that becomes our training data. So then when you want to test, you take the epithelial nuclei again, and we know what they are from the color decomposition, right? And you put these patches into the train network. And what you get out is what you see on the right, namely the nuclei from that patch. And then when you get the nuclei around or throughout the gland labeled, you will find the actual grade of the gland.
Okay, interesting. So it's at a nucleus and cellular level rather than the whole gland level. Am I understanding this correctly?
Well, you will reconstruct the gland, because you will get, and it's actually based on percentage, you may actually get a gland that 80% of them say grade 4, and the other 10 gives you benign, spurious things. So you go for the majority of the grade you get from the nuclei.
Which to me sounds a lot more quantitative than the classical approach, I would say. Because to me, the classical approach would be kind of a guesstimation by a pathologist, oh, this is a malignant gland because there is enough malignant features, right? Whereas if you have a cell, you can actually describe what are the malignancy criteria of this particular cell. And then if you have enough of these cells, then obviously that's going to give you a malignant gland that's going to have a specific label assigned from the software. Do I understand it correctly?
Yes, I think in particular, it's my experience, although I should say it's limited, but from the couple of dozen pathologists I have known, they may disagree on the overall malignancy grade, but they rarely disagree on the grade of an individual gland. And that means if you grade it on the gland, your level, you are going to get, I believe, a better grade, more reliable grade. Now, there may be pathologists out there that disagree about that because, I'm not a pathologist, so but that has been my experience.
We do tend to disagree, but to me it makes logical sense because, like you say, okay, a structure, in this case, either a cell or a gland, we will rather agree whether it's malignant or benign, whether if you need to do a whole slide extrapolation of that, you have like visual assessment, visual estimations, which I call guesstimations. And obviously you're gonna increase the level of disagreement, increase the level of discrepancy between observers. So the kind of smaller the structure to assess, the more agreement you're gonna have. And capitalizing on that with like letting the software do the extrapolation, and it's not a guesstimation anymore, it's actually a calculation, is going to lead to more accurate results. That's how I understand it.
Now we're going to go to the next slide because you're obviously running this very well because you. So this is a screenshot of what the pathologist would see in this decision support system. So on the left side, and this may be actually on two screens, but I've crammed it into one screen. So on the left side, you see part of a biopsy, prostate biopsy. And here you can zoom in and out and pan up and down as you would with a microscope. Now, CADES has already graded this, but you can start without, having it graded. And what you see here in green are the benign glands. In yellow are the grade 3 on the Gleason scale, and the orange are on grade 4 on the Gleason scale. There are, I don't think, any grade 5 glands in this example. And this is what you just talked about, because here, let's also look to the right. The right is part of what the pathologist fills out. And you see that red box because CADES thinks this is 3+4 score according to Gleason. The pathologist has probably accidentally or without some purpose to demonstrate this set 4 for the primary grade and 3 for the secondary. And it says CADES disagrees with this. Now you, the pathologist, can say, whoops, I made a mistake. Or you can say, no, I'm right, and CADES is wrong, and you can always override what CADES thinks. But as you can see, it's also very easy. I mean, at least in prostate screening, you also measure the length of the areas of cancer, which is important for the overall, malignancy grading. So it's very easy for the pathologist, if they don't trust what grade CADES gives, is to go back and look at this and say, I don't agree with that gland. Or you can very easily confirm that you believe what Cadest is saying, because you see exactly what Cadest is thinking, so to speak.
So 2 concepts here that you mentioned. One of them, it is, and it's in the name of the company and the tool, it's a decision support. It's an assistant, right? And if you disagree, you can disregard. And the other thing is explainability, but for the pathologist, by showing exactly, okay, which structure is being labeled as what. And then that also visually helps the pathologist assess what they would be assessing without this visual aid. They can confirm, okay, green actually looks benign. The other colors look as if I would be grading them. And once they trust the system, and it's explained visually to them, they can be supported. They can be supported by this decision support tool. That's how I see it.
Yes, that's what we believe. Yeah. No, I could if you ever want to try it out, Alex, not right now, but I can give you a password and you can log in and try it out and see what it's like to play with.
I would like to do it. That would be great.
You can become a prostate pathologist in no time.
I could give some annotations, that's for sure, even though I usually do TalksPath for a living. So we have this tool. It's a pretty explainable, straightforward assistance tool for pathologists for prostate. How did you decide that, okay, from solving this problem that you noticed ages ago with the staining, how did you decide to embark on the entrepreneurial journey? How did you decide, okay, I want to make this commercially available and not just a fun research project to prove that there are better stains to do Gleason grading than H&E?
Well, so Uppsala and actually all Swedish universities support entrepreneurship. We have, and I think we're the only country that have what's called professor's privilege, which means we own our inventions. Now that's a big blessing, because on the one hand, we own our patents. On the other hand, we have to pay for our patents. And if you have ever tried, where it's like there's things you paid for 20 years. That was one thing that made it easy. I've always, I think, been interested in starting a company, and this seemed the perfect example. Now, the students that worked with me that were not interested in joining the company were kind enough to sign over their rights to us. And then I had a wonderful postdoc, very brilliant guy. He joined me in the company. Now, the university has also organizations. One was Uppsala University Innovation that supports budding entrepreneurs. They have courses to teach you how to write a business plan, how to pitch for investors. They even arrange for you to meet with investors. They also have a lot of contacts in the local community with things like law firms and accounting firms. So they make these connections for you. And so for me, I don't remember it's such an arduous task to set up the company. They also give you sometimes a small fund so that you can get up and running. But of course, then starts the arduous task of chasing money, which is something you do.
Every entrepreneur is probably familiar with.
Yes, I think they are. And so the area around the university was also a wonderful place for finding consultants. I've worked at the laboratories where I learned how to run lean and mean. I said, but you have to have little support. And so I did this mostly through consultants. So we outsourced, making of the stains and testing of the slides. If I needed somebody in analytical chemistry, I could find that. I found a wonderful statistical consulting firm and so on. So one of the reasons I could do this cheaply is that I relied on these consultants. Now, it means that you have to know what you want so that they work very efficiently. But for me, this worked very well and gave us, with very small minimal funds, a working company.
I think something different about CADES is that you combine the staining part, the kits, so like something that you actually had to manufacture, something physical that you had to test and make sure it's consistent with software, right? And I see it in the industry that different companies are partnering to have a workflow. You decided to design it like that from the get-go. Was this an advantage where you were, for example, trying to convince investors to invest or support you in the while you were working on creating the company? Or was it more of a hurdle and they didn't understand why these two extremes, software and chemistry?
I would say when we went to the FDA, it would have been easier if it'd been two things, I think. But we can talk about my encounter with the FDA later. But I think that the investors I spoke to understood that, we had done our due diligence and we could not find a workable solution that we could purchase, which was our first. We'd done our due diligence. We could show them that we could not find what we needed. So I think that they believed that. But it had been easier had we found a company that already could provide us with the stain that we wanted that would meet our requirements. So.
Would you then rather own the workflow? Like, okay, you say it would have been easier, but in the hindsight, are you happy that you have both? Is that like of a commercial maybe, or maybe not only commercial advantage, but what I'm trying to say here is test performance advantage?
Well, of course, by owning the whole thing, we could tailor everything to our needs. But I think if you look at what the companies are like in the US, that they have a focus on stains. They outsource on a different way. They, like you said, they don't own the workflow. They do part of it and they partner with others. So I think possibly over time, that's what one would have to do, and it's advantageous. But it's hard to get the quality you need. That's the difficulty.
So what about the regulators? What about the story behind your regulatory path? And obviously they're different in Europe and in the US. So please tell me your encounters and how did you have to deal with that?
We actually filed a de novo application with the FDA in January 2019. And that was, the proposal was with a very large, well-regarded U.S. hospital. I won't tell you the name of them. I don't know if they want you to know, but that's neither here nor there.
Let's keep it secret for now.
For now, yes. I think it was a very ambitious proposal. It was actually done with the consulting firm that had helped Philips get their FDA approval, so they were very good. But when I came, because FDA was not new, they hadn't wrapped their head around, artificial intelligence or computational pathology. So they were very suspicious of the whole endeavor, I would say.
Oh, really?
Yes. Well, I think they appreciate it, but they wanted us to extend it and make it even more encompassing. Have more test sites, for example. And it became impossible for a small company to do that. It was going to cost about $1 million as it was. And, that's 10 million crowns. And that sounds a lot. I don't know how it is when you go to Poland and translate into Polish money, but
That
You
would
say
be
it's $1 million. Doesn't
4
sound like
million
a lot.
zloty. Yeah, 4 million zloty.
So
That's
10
a lot.
million crowns is a lot. Sounds like a lot of money, more lovely. And so, I mean, it wasn't really a realistic thing for a small company to do. Now, you asked about the whole thing about separate. Had it been smart to go to the FDA with the stain and then with the technology separately? Probably is the answer to that. But I mean, I don't know that, but I think so. And, but, I was new to the FDA and I was visit them 2 or 3 times and that, it made it not possible to continue.
Okay. What about the European counterpart? Do you guys have the CE IVD mark?
Well, we didn't actively pursue that. Actually, it was fairly easy. We could have filed in Europe then. They changed their procedures, and I'm trying to not remember. That was in May. I mean, it's a few years ago. They changed their system. So it was fairly easy. It would have been fairly easy to get a CE mark at that time. But I judged it more important to get FDA approval. And, we had the resources, so we focused more on that. Now I think it is as difficult, very similar procedures in Europe.
So without making any claims or disclosing anything that you cannot disclose, where do you stand right now on your regulatory pathway?
Well, actually, where the company stands is I would like somebody to acquire or some company to acquire Cadest and to incorporate the technology we have, including all the algorithms and data, into their efforts.
So do you have a vision what kind of partner would benefit from this technology? Because that's also part of the message of this podcast. If somebody hears it, who would you like, or what kind of partner are you looking for? What kind of partner do you think would be able to leverage this technology? And we don't have to say any names, but basically describe, okay, who would it be a fit for?
As you point out, there are really 2 parts to the company, right? One is the stain solution. And I think there are several companies that make stains that could benefit from this methodology. Doesn't necessarily have to be an alternative for H&E. They could also benefit from optimizing the stains that they sell. So potentially, one or more of those companies could utilize that technology. There are, as you know, and some of them have been on your podcast, the companies that do analyze prostate cancer and other malignancies. And I think they could benefit some from our algorithmic work.
So have you done any work on other indications than prostate? If you can disclose a little bit on parallel work.
But we have not worked on other types of cancer, but prostate cancer is over 99% adenocarcinoma, stomach, colon, breast, it's 90 to 90% adenocarcinoma, even lungs, I think, is a large portion adenocarcinoma. And I think it's every reason to expect it will work well there. But I think more important is what we have is a methodology for improving staining. And that, can be done for any stain, counter stain. It also works for tricolor theory, probably for 4 colors. It is not tied to prostate. We happened to start with a prostate because it was an interesting problem.
I would like to go back to the computer vision aspect and AI training aspect of this, because you mentioned in our previous conversations that this approach requires a lot less data to train good segmentation algorithms. How much less data is it? What kind of advantage would this approach, this staining approach, give researchers, companies, and basically the diagnostic community in terms of reducing the number of training data necessary to have good algorithms?
Well, I don't think I can quantify, say how much, but because we automatically find the outlines of the glands. This is not done by somebody drawing on it for actually for a region or for a gland. It will be more precise. And I think that the little arrows and so on will mess up your algorithm. So I think that the precision we have, we make it better. Now, I think that if you have an AI system and you have errors in it, you have to compensate for that, for adding more data to eventually get a good selection. So I believe that the precision we get is very advantageous. And I actually, or it's more a theory, is that I think that it will probably not require as many supplemental stains if you have a very exact solution that you can verify. So
do you think this is going to be the optimized stain, or are there going to be other stains that pathologists are going to be using in the future? Let's say like in 10 years, where a lot of this work hopefully is going to be computer aided, supported by algorithms, by AI models. What percentage of the labs are going to be using optimized stains?
Well, I was thinking, in 10-year time, all of them will use it for some stain. So I think because of the opportunity of optimize the number of stains and possibly by better staining, reduce the amount of staining needed, I think that you will see it, but it will take time. Paradigm shifts take time.
Did you encounter resistance when you were suggesting something else, even though it looks so similar and there is no change in pathologist perception and rather improvement of pathologist visual perception of the tissue? Did you encounter any pushback when you were suggesting a different stain than H&E?
Well, I think the pathologists have years to it. They say it takes them a couple of months before they are completely comfortable. And I understand that. I mean, you learn to be pathologist by looking at thousands of images, right? And you get better and better, and now you're changing one of the parameters. But I think that they found it didn't take more than a couple of months. So, but I think they have to, it's a little bit like, no, I don't want to do that because it's a bit scary. Am I going to be as good as I was before, right? But I think by and large, when people see it, it's not that hard. No, you started to ask, do I think it's this stain? I mean, I think one should really look more for different stain counter-stain combinations and to find the most optimal ones you can find. I think that this one works very well, but I wouldn't be object to people trying other combinations as well.
And you showed you can totally objectively measure whatever is best for the tools that you're later going to be using, the computational tools. And I also think that in the time of personalized medicine, of multiplex immunofluorescence staining, of immunohistochemistry being like the standard of care, it's not that we are so locked into H&E. Obviously, this is the thing that's most prevalent. So I think there is this tendency to try to leverage for everything we can, right? But there is a limitation to this, and then no amount of data is going to solve the limitation. So then, okay, what are the other solutions that we can think of? And one of them is, optimized stain. Whatever like you say, whatever you need to optimize for. In this case, we're optimizing for the distinction between epithelium and stroma, to be able to segment better. If there are other, if immune cells is something you're interested in, what would be the stains that would help you segment that best? And, there are different applications. And obviously a balance need to be found between, for everything, a different stain versus one stain for everything, right? There is going to be somewhere in the middle. So for researchers working on computational pathology approaches, any technical approaches that they should prioritize? Anything else, then, okay, let's find the optimal stain if the one we're working with is not the best. Any words of wisdom for people who are going to be doing this, because this is booming. Now we have whole slide images. This is a normal thing. And we have new computational computer vision approaches and multimodal approaches. Anything that you have seen that you what you would like to recommend or you would like to advise to focus on?
There is an inherent problem with clinical data, is that it's often faulty. So in the long term, can we really expect to have algorithms that give good performance, a good way of discriminating between, it's cancer or no cancer, types of cancer? Physicians cannot do that. And a lot of work today, we use as ground truth what a committee often of 3 physicians tell us. Well, are they right or are they wrong?
Depends how much coffee they had in the morning, how stressed they are, how many annotations they have done this day already. So a lot of variables.
I know that you have experiences, but I think it is an interesting question is what are the limits of what we can do in terms of diagnosis and prognosis with these types of technology. So that's a very fundamental question. So I also, and I want to put that out in case somebody is listening and wants to do this, because, there are some groups that have more cancer than others. Particularly African Americans have a lot more prostate cancer than white Americans. But you probably didn't, it's like twice as much. You probably don't know this, but so do Swedes.
No, I did not know that.
The total amount of cancer in Sweden is about the same as in the US, but the portion of cancer, prostate cancer, is about twice as high or close to twice as high. Now, there are more descendants of Swedes from the late 1800s in this country than there are in Sweden.
Oh, really?
Now, here's the question. Can we see that on the rate of prostate cancer on the descendants of the Swedes? The same is true for Norwegians. So can we see that on the descendants of the Swedes here? Now, this is a very specific question, but I was hoping some ambitious grad school, because I don't have time or ability to do this, would look at that problem because
But that is a very interesting population prevalence of disease in genetically related populations. Interesting. So if anybody is interested in pursuing this project, feel free to contact Ingrid to discuss. Ingrid, what I'm going to do, I know you gave me a list of publications and patents about CADES and about the work you did. So I'm going to put all of them in the show notes. Anything else that you would like to hear about from the trailblazers? We mentioned that if there is any partner that would be interested in acquiring part of the full chain of your technology.
All of it, yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
You are open to the discussion. So definitely feel free to contact me or you. I'm going to leave your LinkedIn profile in the show notes as well. Anything else that we maybe forgot to cover?
And anybody who has questions, I'm very happy to talk to and explain further or let people try out the systems, whatever they want to do. So they should contact me. And then I'll give you some final words of wisdom I think we're coming to that. Right?
Please do, yes.
Okay, so, it comes in 2 parts. I worked in several industries. When you work with real-world data, I think you should start by really understanding how that real-world data was collected. Can you improve upon that process So you don't try to solve a problem just to overcome the problems of the data collection. And then I want to end with a word of wisdom by quoting Thomas Paine from he wrote something about common sense in 1776. And it's a long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives a superficial appearance of being right. And that's a final comment on H&E.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me, for explaining these complex topics. For me personally, the color topics, and I always get, after these episodes, I get comments and discussions from people from the physics spectrum of medicine, and they're difficult for me because I never studied it, so I very much appreciate you explaining. Thank you so much for the visuals. Whoever is just listening to it, go head to YouTube and look at all the images. Thank you so much, and I wish you a wonderful day.